Before I start my speech proper, I just want to say something about my own public speaking abilities. Some of you may know that I've had 2 liver transplants. I've been very fortunate to have those 2 liver transplants, and each one of them has affected my ability to public speak. Before my first transplant, my liver loved public speaking. It was witty, it was erudite, it was engaging. It was a fantastic public speaker, that liver. The second liver was a complete dog at public speaking. If I'd had a script by Spike Milligan and Tommy Cooper, I couldn't have made it funny. It was rubbish. This third liver, we're not quite sure about it because I haven't done much public speaking since it, but my impression of it is it's a bit cocky and it's apt to wander on a bit. So I've asked Anne in the front row when it gets to 20 minutes to hoik me off, but I'll try my best with my new liver to do some justice to this. I think the other thing about conference speeches is that everybody wants a bit of them. Everybody tells you, we want you to say this, we don't want you to say that, we want you to be cautious because Joe's in the room and we don't want him to hear anything about the Scottish Government. We want you to get this tone right, we want you to be outgoing, we want you to put on a good show. And all of that can get you to a stage where it becomes over-planned, over-scripted, and genuinely probably a wee bit dull. So I've made an assumption today, which is I'm here amongst friends. So I can junk all the planning. I've got about 4 or 5 things that I want to say, and I've decided just to say them straight and try and get some messages across. No doubt I'll find out this afternoon whether I am amongst friends or not. The first thing I want to say is to make, if you like, an observation and a recognition about a very important aspect of my chairmanship of CAS. I was elected by you guys on the basis that I would bring about a fundamental change in the way in which CAS, as a national capacity, related to the rest of the network. And there had, of course, before that, been some difficulties in that relationship. Now, I think we've made real progress on that, but I don't think we've quite yet managed the fundamental shift that I envisaged. And I know from speaking to CABs, both managers of CABs and members of boards, that still sometimes we do stuff and then we tell you we've done it. We sometimes don't even tell you that we've done some stuff and you find out about it from another direction. And while I think we are making progress, and I take my hats off to the officers at CAS who are making that progress, we haven't quite got that right yet. And I still think there are some fundamental issues that we've got to change to make that work properly. I think the first of those is that we still are in a situation where there's so much work to do at CAS that we concentrate on the task, and once we've done the task, we start thinking, oh, we better communicate that to some other people. We've got to get to a situation where communicating isn't something in addition to the task, it's the way we go about our business. And I know that this afternoon at the AGM, there's going to be a motion that tries to put some form around that idea, that whenever we're doing something, from the beginning, we hardwire in the idea that we've got to be communicating well and often and with real engagement in order to make things work. I think the second fundamental difficulty I think there is just about the number of times we get together. I know it's difficult, but it doesn't seem to me to be a great situation where actually, formally, the only time you as a network get to hold us to account for how we've done and what we're doing is once at an AGM. And I think we've got to build in to the development of our committee structure a better mechanism that allows you, our members, to say to us, look, we see the direction you're going in, but we think you're going too fast, we think you're going too slow, we think it's not quite right. And I don't mean this in a nasty way, but I think you've got to be able to hold us to account for the things that we say we're going to do and how we do them. So I think there's quite a lot of work still to be done here. I'm not saying that because I think we failed, but I'm saying it to recognise what you've been telling me. We have not got this right yet, and we've got some more work to do to make it work for all of us. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing I wanted to say is about the general direction of travel we're going in and a difficulty that I see now emerging as a result of that direction of travel. There's no doubt in my mind that the board and I are convinced that the long-term sustainability and viability of our network depends on the strategy that we all worked on and outlined. So we've set out a very clear strategy for the future. And that strategy, as you know, has got 4 strands to it. The first of those is that at a national level, we have to continue to bring in new resources to the network. And at a local level, if you've got troubles, we've got to help you bring in resources at a local level. So bringing resources into the network is clearly a part of the strategy we must always work on. The second part is developing our national infrastructure and other common services where we feel that it's better to do something once or twice rather than 60 times. And I still think there is room for that work to continue. But that's the second element of the strategy. The third is about being a more effective advocate on behalf of our citizens, using the information you give us to make sure that instead of citizens coming across difficulties, if we can engage with government and other bodies about public policy that means that citizens won't suffer from those difficulties in the first place, that's a better way of doing it. And we've got to make much more use of the information that you give us in a much more impactful way to make sure that where we can change policy to bring about a benefit for citizens, we're part of that. I don't mean us to become a political group, but I don't think we'd be doing the whole of our job if we didn't treat that aspect of our work pretty seriously. And the fourth aspect of our strategy is with regard to, if you like, maintaining and developing our brand. We are fortunate that both locally and nationally, our brand is hugely well recognised and hugely well respected. But it would be a mistake to think it will always be like that, and it would be a mistake to think that we will always be, in people's minds, the first point of call for the issues that they have. So it's worth protecting and building the brand still further. So we feel that for the network as a whole, and it's, I think, different for you individually as CABs, you'll have your own strategy, but for the network as a whole, our future viability depends on getting these 4 things right. And I think we feel that we've had some successes. We are bringing in new resources, and in fact, in quite big amounts of money. And they're coming in from external sources at a national level. And we'll continue to do that. And we know that that has caused some difficulty, because if you bring in resources, but you also bring in extra work, have you actually improved the situation? So we've got to be careful how we do that. We've got to bring in resources that actually create a benefit for you and a benefit for the citizens that you are serving. We aren't just going to chase the money. We've got to add value by bringing in the new resources. But I do think we've done pretty well on that. I think that with regard to our common services, one of the things that some of the new resources have allowed us to do is to really move on the business of developing a national infrastructure that allows us all to be able to say that we are genuinely offering a multi-channel approach to the way in which we do business. So wherever you are in Scotland, we hope very soon to be in a position where citizens can choose to come in face-to-face, they can use telephony, they can use web, they can use whatever they like. We still believe, and I'll come back to this elsewhere in this speech, that the face-to-face is the core of what we do, but we recognise that in the modern world, people will access our services, at least at first, in a variety of ways. And I think we've done a decent job at building that infrastructure, and we'll see the results of that into the future. I think we are becoming better and more adept at developing relationships outside our network that allow us to advocate on behalf of citizens in a way that is really meaningful. And whether that's taking on the Westminster government about benefits changes that don't advantage our citizens and making a point about the unfairness of some of that and getting some result, or whether it's about easier things than that, we are using the information you give us in a very particular way to make sure that we change public policy where it's possible. We're an active partner to policymakers, and we want to be an active partner to policymakers in a mature way that doesn't take people on, but it does say, if you make this policy, and you can see from the information we give you that it's having a completely different effect on people than you expected, we would expect you to engage with changing that policy to allow citizens to have an easier go at it. So I think we are becoming better at the advocacy. And I think we're equally aware that we've got to build the brand. And I think the brand nationally has moved on from where it was 2 years ago. And I think we just have a watching brief on that. That means we've got to maintain the brand and develop it where we can. So I think we're making progress on those things. And it would be easy for us to say, well, that's great then. Everything's going pretty well. But I think there's a real problem here. And it's the disjunction between a long-term strategy that's about the viability of our network into the future and what's happening today to you guys on the ground. We know that because of a combination of a loss of funding, either from local sources or sometimes from national sources, coupled with a huge increase in demand for a variety of reasons, the pressure on all of you is intense. And when we look round the network, the pressure on some of us is almost unbearable. And it would be wrong for us to say, look, we've got a long-term strategy that in 3 years will make life better if some people ain't going to be here with all of their services in 3 years to see the benefit of that. So alongside the long-term viability of the network, we have to deal with the short-term difficulties that some of you are experiencing. And that's a network problem. And we at CAS have got to think, how much can the network do to support some of its members that are in difficulty? And it seems to me that raises a really, really difficult problem that we, not at CAS, but we as a network have to be comfortable with. Because when people are in difficulty, it's going to come down probably to a couple of things that will get them out of that problem. One is support, and where we can offer support to re-engage with a CAB and people around it to make sure that they present their cases in the best way and they've got the greatest chance of success, and we can work with CABs in order to help that happen, we will do that. But ultimately, some people are just going to have too little money to maintain all the services that they previously have offered. The pressure on resources is as strict as that in some places. So the question is, if it's a matter of resources, and we at CAS have got national resources coming in, are we as a network prepared to see us allocate some of that resource on the basis that we can't afford to let anybody down? We can't afford to let services in one part of the country disappear. We can't afford to see a CAB closing its doors. And are we willing to disproportionately allocate resources to those places who are in the greatest need? Now, clearly for me, when we distribute resources, the biggest part of how we distribute resources should be on the basis of the needs of the clients that are going to use those resources. But what I'm advocating is that because having a national footprint and being able to go to the government and say, wherever you are in Scotland, if you want to be our partner, we can ensure that there is a CAB in that area and it's able to offer the full range of resources. If that idea is going to be important to our future, making sure that every CAB does survive and that every CAB is able to offer the full range of services that it wants to becomes an important matter. So my view is, it is worth being very careful about looking at those of us who find it really, really difficult, perhaps because of the decisions of others, just to keep going. And we must allocate resources from our national capacity to make sure that happens. But to do that, somebody else is getting less resources than they otherwise might have got. And that's a CAB too. So how do we wrestle with making sure that we're fair to everybody, but we don't lose anybody on the journey? And for me, we haven't got that sorted yet. But over the next year, 18 months, I guarantee that that's going to be something that we really, really have to wrestle with if we're going to keep the whole network together. And my view is that keeping the whole network with its national footprint, with all of the services we're used to, is a vital part of our long-term success. So we'll be coming back to this over time, I think, but I'm asking for your understanding that that is an issue that we are wrestling with and that we're going to have to deal with. There are other things I want to mention, probably 3 final things that I want to mention that we have to deal with, and they're about what's happening in the world outside us. The first of those is about Consumer Scotland. And we know from the government, quite properly, that something called Consumer Scotland is in their manifesto, and it's going to happen. And I think the government has not yet settled on exactly what that looks like. We are in discussions with the government about the way that will be designed and what it will look like. And I think our concerns are some of them very selfish, which is we know that while there is a commitment to something called Consumer Scotland as an organisation, there ain't no any new money for it. And it's quite likely, therefore, that if there is Consumer Scotland, the money for that will come from our network somewhere. So we want to make sure, not that we're just saying no, but that we talk to government to make sure that whatever the impact of that is, it's as small as it can be, and that we are seen to make our case very positively. Not to say don't do Consumer Scotland, but to say we can be part of Consumer Scotland. We already are a capacity that offers advice to consumers, and we want to use that capacity to support your manifesto commitment to have a different style of consumer service to people in Scotland as powers are devolved to the Scottish Government. The other thing, I think, about Consumer Scotland is that on behalf of the citizens you serve, we would want to make sure that the client journey, as we call it, doesn't become hopelessly disintegrated. Because the people that come and see you about debt may also be coming to see you about a consumer problem. And it's useful for you to be able to deal with that problem as a whole entity. What we don't want is another agency without the hardwired in links to us gets created, which means that we've got to say, well, sorry, we can't deal with that. We'll have to hand you over to somebody else, because we know that's not what citizens want. They want to come and be able to express a whole range of issues to us and to get solutions from us in a holistic way. So I think it's not us saying we're scared of Consumer Scotland or we don't think you should do it. What we're saying is the way you do it's vitally important to us, and we want to make sure that some of the things that we know are important to citizens are important to the way in which you design this new organisation. The second thing I think we've got to address is what I'm calling the digital dilemma. And that is this, that it seems to me that there are two schools of thought, and this is clearly a bit of a hard-edged way of putting it, for effect. But it seems to me there are two schools of thought. One is, and I think this is the one we would hold to, that face-to-face discussion with people is going to be the cornerstone of the way in which effective advice is delivered. Some people may not need that, and they may only phone up or they may only contact us through the web or whatever. But the option of being able to speak to a real person, as we saw in the video there, means a huge amount to many of our citizens. But we know face-to-face is expensive, it's intensive, and it requires to operate out of premises, etc., etc. So there's a school of thought that that's vitally important going into the future. Whatever you're saying about advice services, we would think that face-to-face is going to remain at the centre of it. But there's another school of thought out there which we can't ignore, which is that digital improvement is going to make a fundamental and huge difference to the way in which advice is delivered. And I've heard it said to me that the only people who are going to want face-to-face are old folks who can't use a computer or a phone. That the new upcoming people are never going to want to face-to-face. They're just going to want to go digital and make contact with services that way. And a big advantage of that school of thought is, of course, that a purely digital world would be much less expensive. And it would engage with very large numbers of people for not very much money. Now, we can't ignore that, because I think our view is, yeah, you can engage with people digitally, but what you can't do is comprehensively solve their problems and know that you've done it. So there's an argument afoot in the country, and this isn't an us or them, there is just an argument afoot in the country about where does digital fit. And I think we've got to win an argument that while we've got to develop our digital capacity, not ignore that modern aspect of the world, we have at our heart the idea that our personal, face-to-face interaction with citizens is one of the cornerstones of what advice should be. And it will be less fair, it will be less equal, it will be less effective if we go down a digital route at the expense of face-to-face. I don't think we've won that argument yet, and I think we've got to to carry on giving evidence that that's the way forward for advice services in Scotland into the future. And the last thing, and it's part of this conference, is there is still a debate, and still in my mind, a fundamental misunderstanding amongst some professionals outside our organisation about the value and professionalism of a volunteer-led service. There are still some people out there who feel that somehow or other a volunteer-led service is less professional, less effective, less well-informed than one which is based purely on professional advice givers. Now, we know that's not the case, and we know that volunteers in our network are some of the most well-trained, the best informed, and the best at supporting their fellow citizens. But again, we haven't wholly won that argument, and especially when it comes to people talking about how we might deliver so-called statutory services, where people have got a right to that service under the law. There's a view that perhaps a volunteer-led service is less able to do that than one which is fully based on professionals. Now, I think we've got to win that argument because we owe it to our volunteers, we owe it to the model of service delivery we've got to win that argument, and actually we owe it to citizens in Scotland because we believe that is the most effective way to deliver the service that we're trying to do. So those three areas will remain for us a focus where we've got to be working with other partners in order to make sure that we deliver and continue to deliver the quality of service that you, through the CABs, have been delivering now for 80 years. It seems to me, therefore, that, just in conclusion, we at CAS have got a clear agenda for the next year. One is about fundamentally changing the nature of our engagement as a network and get that right and nail that down, because if it remains an uncomfortable thing between us, we'll be less effective than we should be. So you have my commitment that I've heard your concerns about that, and we are continuing to work on that, and I am sure we will get it right. Secondly, we'll pursue the strategy, the long-term strategy, because I still believe that's right. But while we're doing it, we'll have an eye to make sure that nobody falls down the cracks in the pavement while we're pursuing this long-term strategy. And I think we do have to wrestle with that argument about how we best support colleagues who, perhaps through no fault of their own, find themselves in such overwhelming difficulty that life becomes really seriously difficult for them. And I think we as a network have got to rally around and support these people. And we've got to address these three outstanding issues to make sure, not that we take them on as a fight, but that our influence about how those three issues, and there'll be more as we go through the next year, some other issues will arise. But as they come up, we've got to, on your behalf, win some arguments, win some hearts and minds, and make sure that our model of service delivery is seen for what it is, something that has been fundamental to advice giving, but also equalities over the last 80 years, and we want it to be just as successful over the next 80 years. So we have to win those arguments. So that's my agenda for next year, and I hope if we're successful in that, you will see that the national capacity, which is CAS, adds value to your local work, because that's, as I said when I was elected, the whole reason for us to exist, and we've got to carry on trying to achieve that. So thanks for listening to me this morning. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you very much.